Hi everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of the Precursive Perspective. I'm delighted today to be joined by Ilene Landon, who is the SVP of Customer Success at Vena. How are you, Ilene? Nice to see you.
Doing good, thanks.
Doing good. Are you a dogs person? I can see a couple of dogs there in the background. Are those your dogs?
Yes, I have one now. She's a husky, husky
Nice.
rescue. We've had her for a few years, but we've had several other dogs before her. So you see those behind me. Lots of
Yeah,
mutts,
yeah.
a couple huskies.
And what's your dog's name?
Sasha.
Sasha. Very good. I've got two Dachshund Beagle
Oh,
crosses
little
who
guys.
are mischievous, called Cosmo and Ace.
Yeah, mine
Yeah.
is very upset with us for the fact that the weather's gotten warmer. She liked it when it was very cold.
Oh
So
right, yeah, yeah, of course, yeah. Ours is actually finally better because it rained in the UK for like a month, and so letting them outside was always an absolute nightmare for house, home, and all of the rest. Well, look, great to get you on. Excited about this one. We're going to be covering a few topics. Give folks a little bit of background to yourself and scope your role, career highlights, things like that.
yeah, sure. Happy to be here. I'm Senior Vice President of Customer Success at Vena Solutions. It's software for FP&A and IT teams to help build connected decisions across business with agentic AI embedded in Microsoft tools. Been here for about 2 years. And before that, I led our global professional services delivery organization for HireVue, which is AI assessment and recruiting software.
Yep.
Currently at Vena, I lead our global PS and delivery services sales customer success organization.
Okay, cool. So you've got services sales underneath you as well. Interesting. Very good.
Yeah, and
Better
in
to be
all,
under you than under sales in
yeah, there's
most.
positives and negatives, but definitely there's advantages
Yeah.
there. What's
Okay.
really interesting is in those last two companies, as well as prior companies that I've worked with, I've been in running delivery organizations for SaaS companies for 20 something years, various sizes and complexities. But across the roles, the thread's been the same, where I've been brought in to transform PS organizations that were either considered underperforming or undervalued. And we're talking about different products, different markets, different size organizations. But in the patterns and the playbook seem to be very similar. And
Hmm.
in most cases, it always started with just the perception of PS, both internally and externally within the company. So very
Yeah, yeah.
similar challenges.
Yeah, I can imagine. What do you think is like in the most common perception of professional services based upon what you've seen?
Yeah, again, it's amazing the variety of types of companies I've worked for, and it tends to be the same perception, which is why this is definitely a topic I enjoy talking about. From the outside looking in, often PS is seen as slow, overcomplicated. They might make selling harder. It takes too long to implement. Sales might say we're actually slowing down their ability to close deals. Product probably thinks that we're complaining about little nits about the product that aren't really relevant to the larger customer base. CS might say that our customer is not ready when we release them out of delivery. But PS also has perceptions looking outward of how of other parts of the organization. So the team might feel projects are miscoped. They don't understand why sales is selling to the customers they're selling to. No one understands how hard their role is. They don't think the product works the way it needs to. So they tend to sort of feel like this victim of whatever flows down to them, and then they don't feel empowered. So you end up with a PS team that feels like the victim, which becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because then the rest of the organization is not leveraging PS the way they could. And now PS becomes a brake instead of the accelerator that they can be because everybody's looking through their own lens and nobody's working to see how to work more effectively together. So I think the part that people sometimes can miss is there's work to be done on both sides of the equation, on the outside in and the inside out, but it doesn't start with the metrics and processes. It usually starts with the people side of it.
Yep. Yep. I think a lot of the time people inside of many companies, not just software companies, um, feel like things are very linear, or they
Yeah.
think that things are very linear. I do my bit, you do your bit,
Mhm.
and it all sort of it goes in a line, and it
Yeah.
doesn't at all. Um, just it's inherently more complex and interconnected than I think humans appreciate or anticipate. And the best companies really get that, and they lean into that, and they've in some way checked their collective egos
Hmm.
about that. The difficult organizations is oftentimes when you have some folks that really do get that and are trying to get in the boat and go in the same direction, and then you have people who are playing a political game or a one-upmanship type of approach, and that tends to slow things down. But I think your comment around don't be the victim is kind of should be the PS bumper sticker. I think we should also get into through the conversation how you exploit the fact that services should be the glue, right? It should be the
Yeah.
glue, and that's the opportunity for services when done right. Um, the I think many have pigeonholed themselves when you talk to services people in delivery, right? That's a common mistake, is like we are delivery, and really I think what people the more commercially astute folks understand is like they need to shift that perception from being like this fulfillment layer to being a growth engine. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the perception issue on both sides can generate that we're just here to flip the switch for the product. So you break the cycle by looking at it in two phases. Like I mentioned, there's sort of the inside out and then the outside in. And then once you can generate results, you can prove that out in data. And now you start raising the PR of what PS can actually do for the company as an organization. So when I first come into a new organization, usually I start by listening. What are the pain points? Where is trust broken down? Both within PS as well as within other parts of the organization as their perspective of PS. But then within PS, what does the team actually think their mission is? A lot of the times I get brought into these organizations and I hear things like, we need you to go quote unquote fix PS because we don't think we have the right people or we're not doing the right things. But typically, though, that team might not fully understand what their actual mission is and don't necessarily feel empowered to do the things that come naturally as folks that are part of a delivery team. So, in most organizations I've joined, I find that PS can often be driven almost by the wrong North Star. It's all about utilization targets and implementation timelines. And while these metrics are important, the team can lose sight of their mission, which is what their passion is, which is turning this product into a solution that can be transformative to the customer that ultimately drives ARR and growth and adoption, and the metrics will come from that. So moving the team from understanding they are not order takers, that they are consultative, that they come with a point of view and best practices, they've done this before, they can be transformational and define what value means to the customer and drive towards that. At my last company, we actually started in the sales process and identified some key areas that contribute to ROI for the particular value that that product provided. And then
Mhm.
that fed into our PS team, and that was the North Star that we looked at. And what that does is it means you're not just implementing the product, you are looking at change management, process transformation, and understanding how to drive and define what good looks like. So clarifying the mission, defining roles and responsibilities, putting in a more structured, repeatable methodology that gives the team clarity and purpose and helps them understand that their role is to not just implement, but to transform a customer's business processes through the product to achieve ROI. And again, the people aspect, even with the customer, kind of the hard part. Everybody knows how to flip the switches, but the real value that the team delivers is delivering that ROI to the customer. So at HireVue, one of the people on my team said that I gave them their swagger back. And that comes from building that confidence from the inside. And then once you have that sort of structured approach on the inside, now you can start looking at the outside. So you can now look at how sales and product executive team, et cetera, engage with the delivery team. So it's not just accepting the friction, it's sort of addressing it head on and now going to these other teams. So you start with PS to help them understand why product makes decisions it makes. It's all about trade-offs that they need to make in terms of Looking at the market versus existing customers versus implementation ease. It's helping them understand why sales sells the way they do and how it's a benefit to us as a company. Not every customer is going to be perfect. And then how we can potentially help shape that narrative. But then there's also educating the other teams on how PS operates. It's an art, it's not a science. This isn't just building a demo. It's dealing with people, it's dealing with complexity, it's
Yeah.
dealing with data, it's cat herding stakeholders. So creating that psychological safety and sort of shared understanding means that now you can actually have those productive conversations with people.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how silos build up so quickly.
Yeah.
Like we're a small company and we had these silos between our products and our services organization. And like I think fundamentally what people want is well, a part of what people want is to feel heard.
Hmm.
So for example, you can have services providing a lot of very useful feedback on the product and commenting on the things that make the product difficult to implement or gaps in functionality. Um, but they're not just doing that out of spite. They're doing that in the interest of the customers and in the
Yeah.
interest of trying to fix that at a point in the future.
Mhm.
You can't always do it as quickly as you want, but it's great when like we put a load of time into the communications of our roadmap internally as
Mhm.
much as externally. Our external communications of our roadmap still needs to be improved, but our internal comms on it was so important because it really enabled services to know that they were being heard, enabled the customer success team to be able to better communicate to clients about when we're going to address that thing that you need. A lot of it is just being heard. Um, the
Yeah,
second part is then about being understood.
exactly.
So that's the more nuanced piece, and that takes work over time because, there are some knee-jerk reactions or impressions created about services based on a deal that is being managed or delivered. Um, so I think all those points are valid. Imagine if there was actually though just a switch to flip in all of these products, like you had a master config button. I think that's what AI is gonna achieve. Just a big red button in config. Press that, and it's all done. Imagine if it was just flip the switch. So help me understand. Like you've talked you've talked about like the importance of not being the victim, about the not being perceived as like slowing down the go-to-market organization. Why is it so important to shift that narrative about services?
Yeah, I think it's really important because if you have a high performing PS team, it becomes a growth and retention driver. Our services
Yep.
teams have trusted relationships with our customers and they're in the weeds every day. And having that customer knowledge, if we are able to articulate it and organize it correctly, we can start influencing product roadmaps in a way that actually helps drive more adoption and more sales. We can help accelerate sales cycles by being a part of the process and productizing our offerings in a way that expedites how we sell. We can actually generate case studies that sales and marketing can use, whether they're industry based or solution based. There's a huge amount of value. My last company, we started at HireVue, we started to publish success stories and actually talk through success metrics and ROI that we achieved. And it became something shared across the entire organization, used in sales and marketing. So when you have teams that are working well together, the delivery organization can truly be an accelerator for everyone to get better results overall for the company. And that's adoption, it's churn, it's revenue, it's deal velocity, uh,
Yep.
quality of the sale.
Yep. Yeah, I often find like the interesting thing around about like, the case studies is a lot. We're much more focused now on the like not just what were some of the outcomes like time to value improvements or productivity gains or you know the customer like pulling forward more ARR or revenue, which is the type of thing that our product helps to do. But it's like how did that happen? And that's much more of the services journey. It's like how did that company go on that
Mhm.
change the way that they do things over a period of time, because you don't just make those changes and it all cascades through immediately. So I couldn't agree more on that. I think your point around influencing the roadmap is a strong one. I also think that's why kind of forward deployed engineering is growing in importance and popularity in the market, because that flywheel between services and products, I think the best companies have figured out how important that is. Um, you know,
Yeah.
and what we should be building for, and having a closer feedback loop than maybe necessarily what the historical roadmap has driven, right?
Yeah, and I think the key there is focus and prioritization. So you can't have 100 members of your organization reaching out to product and
Yep.
logging requests for features. So the trick is what I've done in the last few places I've worked is you gather a small group of people together that serves as sort of a focus group and
Yep.
takes input from the field, dissects that into specifically areas that we believe are beneficial to current and future customers in terms of adoption, churn mitigation, and also features that we're hearing generally from the field that could be used, and then sharing that with a few folks within the product team, and then creating a feedback loop where, and you mentioned this earlier, where product is providing roadmaps back into the team to say, we heard you here, this is how you've impacted the roadmap. So they do feel heard, but they also understand why certain decisions were made, because there's certain cases where not every piece of feedback is going to be taken in. Obviously,
Yep.
product roadmaps are complex and they're based on a lot of factors. So getting that sort of common respect and communication means that we can be more meaningful in the feedback we give, and then we also understand how that's being used. And product now wants to listen to us because we're not getting in their way; we're actually helping.
Yeah. We have product manager join the services like
Yeah.
weekly conversations where we're going through progress on engagements, and that strengthened that partnership and created a lot more trust, and people felt like they were heard. And then once AI was brought in to remove the need for these updates, right? Because everyone can just, it's all done by AI internally in our organization. Now that's progressed on. Now there's this higher level of trust. That conversation is much more around the best practices, what we're implementing, how can certain things be done so the manual steps of the delivery methodology are much more automated and much more rapid. So once you get to this sort of trust level between products and services, you just can go so much faster, particularly in delivery. Because a lot of the time there are, I think, one of the things we're going to go on and talk to about is like how difficult it is sometimes to package and productize services if you've got a very inherently complex product to set up and configure. A
Mhm.
lot of that's product related. Like a lot of that historically, in my experience, is like just the way that the product is implemented
Yeah,
is very, very manual. And if that can actually be automated, so that
exactly.
the baseline setup, the baseline configuration can be much more automated, and you can bring AI into it. I think that's where you can really begin to compress some of those timelines, because there's only so much you can do through like your project management approach and your broader delivery methodology. You talked about the sort of the internal and like external perception of PS in terms of like the how to deepen like that understanding over time. Um, how do you more broadly approach partnering with those other functions? So like with sales and product and CS as an example.
Yeah, and I think we covered a little bit of this, but just to dive a little bit deeper into it, I think just I'll start with product because I think some of your points were absolutely valid. Um, like I said, just sort of shifting from the team that's just constantly complaining about the product to actually providing that structured, objective feedback. In what we see, so like we talked about, the human element is so important, not just in the organization, but with customers. So something that might seem straightforward in the product is actually sometimes complicated for customers or when people are involved, particularly if you're implementing a product that takes a bunch of different disparate business units within an organization and they all have to come together under one umbrella to, implement a similar workflow, let's say, or a similar business process. So giving that specific insight to the product team can help them understand where customers are getting stuck. We're giving actionable input. And to your point, we're actually doing this today at Vena right now, which is we're identifying the areas in the implementation where we're getting stuck with customers because it's difficult or it takes time, like especially around data and integrations and things like that, where we can pinpoint where in the process we're getting stuck. So when product does start doing more product-led AI efficiencies, we're focusing in on the biggest ROI, not just in time to implement, but more so for the sake of making it easier for our customers and then ultimately making it a more repeatable implementation process for us so that we can start to productize things a little bit more because there's less variability in some of the steps with the customer. And only PS can give that feedback. So now we can invest in the right way. And now at Vena, our delivery organization and our product organization are actually linked arm in arm in these efforts. And it's everybody gets a lot out of it and has a lot to contribute, and it's a great perspective, and we'll have a much better result at a lower cost than we would have had if product had to kind of figure this stuff out on their own.
Mm,
And
yeah.
then on the sales side, this is, I think you had said it often can be like the most fraught relationship. And it starts by speaking the language of sales, which is making PS easier to sell. And that comes back to wherever we can productize packages, create clear timelines, deliver fixed fee, where they can kind of like at Higher View, we had 4 or 5 complexity factors that you check off, and it would tell you whether you went into a small, medium, or large SOW, and they'd literally pull it off the shelf. It was fixed fee, super easy. And then pairing our PS leaders with the sales leaders so that they can join those customer conversations. It takes a little bit of coaching for some PS leaders because when you talk to the customer about an implementation, when you're implementing, you're using a slightly different language than you might when you're in the sales process, for example. So as long as you can sort of coach them on those talking points, then when the customer hears directly or the prospect hears directly from PS on, we're going to walk you through this, here's how we're going to do it, it's going to be a smooth process. Now PS can be more of an accelerator with sales because now we're easier to sell. It's consistent, and now they have support. Then you can start building those trusted relationships within sales. And now you can start giving some feedback to sales if there's some way that they're talking about the implementation with customers that maybe we can help kind of tweak a little bit to help set expectations better without scaring the customer away. There's always a balance there. We can start having more of those honest conversations with sales and partner with them through that to make sure that we're being more successful right before we even start the project.
Mm, yeah. I'm a fan of telling them that it's hard, not smooth, and then but here's how we address that because
Exactly.
it's more the reality because that's what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, you know, but I mean, I come from originally a sales background, and we were doing my last role was like large kind of commercial transformation programs, which cut across sales, marketing, products, lots of different things. So it was big and the opportunity was big, but it was inherently complex. And I think one of the reasons why we did well was because we told people that, because that's what people thought. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, cool. How then? How do we actually do
Yeah.
this? And that's where I think the services piece is like, this is how we de-risk this with you, right? And here's how we partner with you. Um, I
I
think.
think, yeah, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, there's just one other thing I was going to say is like the other element is as well as like speaking the language of sales, it's allowing sales to speak the language of services
Mhm.
and enabling that because it's difficult to cover the ground across so many deals. Maybe you've got like a handful of people in services working with 20, 30, 40, 50, hundreds of reps, and so it's difficult to scale yourself across that. Good salespeople want autonomy. They don't want to be slowed down. That's the slow down bit. They want autonomy. They want to be able to answer the question in the moment that the question comes up. So a big part of it is actually how do you enable sales to speak the language of services, which I think is where AI, like as an enablement solution, comes in really. But you were going to say?
Yeah, no, thank you. That definitely tracks with what I was about to say, which is I think sales often is scared to say anything's difficult. And they're more likely to say, this is going to be super easy, we'll take care of it for you. And if you can educate them, and we have like a couple slides that we educated the sales team that they could talk about to say, to set the expectation of where that, like, we don't implement at customers, we implement with them. So there's always work that the customer is going to have to do. And we can't be afraid to say, hey, customer, you're going to have to put some effort into this. But if you do, you're going to get a huge return on investment. And to your
Yeah.
point, here's how we're going to help you get there. And I think there's always that fine line of helping, either if PS is in the room during this conversation or enabling sales to have the conversation, how to walk that fine line of, it's not simple, but we're going to walk you through it. We've done it before. We've seen it be successful. And here are
Mm.
some of the things you can do to prepare. So we used to have sort of like a homework sheet, and we do this. We've done this at a few companies I've been at, where we give the customer a homework sheet that says, here are the things you can do to prepare for the implementation.
Yep.
Here's how we're going to help you through it. So it sort of takes the mystery out of what's going to happen next. But it is sort of that fine line of, you can't say it's super complicated, but you can't say it's too easy either, because you need to set the expectation right. And I think
Mm.
that's a nuance that can be difficult with the sales team to convey.
Yeah. The other thing is like, well, you sell FP&A software, so it's not simple because it's
No,
FP&A.
no.
But I think the other thing is the perception of sales by services is also something that needs to be, I think, better understood by services management and leaders, which is that there's this narrative that like sales is shit, positioning professional services. Like, hold on. If you sell multiple products to your customers and your salespeople have multiple products that they sell, and they sell those into multiple industries, which is very common, right? Then they're already dealing with a level of complexity in terms of different customers, different stakeholder groups, different way that they talk about it, and different products. So that in and of itself is inherently complex. If you've then got 45 SKUs for onboarding,
Yeah.
right, then all you're doing is creating more noise. So I think a better thing to be really aware of is like, where does not all of sales but some of sales struggle with nailing the value. And if you look at sales performance, it's like a bell curve, right? So you've got the high performers generally delivering the lion's share of the revenue. It's the middle group of your, let's say, average is a bad word. I don't mean to be dismissive, but like the middle tier in terms of performance, if you can move that up and to the right, it's a huge uplift, and that's where services comes in, because that, let me explain to you how we've done that to someone else, might be the thing that tips them over, that they where they've not really understood that for whatever reason through the conversations with your sales team. Um, I'd like to get into um, one piece here, which is linked to helping others to understand services, because it is a business within a business, right? So, and services inherently impacts the performance of the overall company because of cost and because of how margin is calculated and these types of things. So, why do you need to educate sales on services economics?
Yeah, this is always a really difficult topic, because the last thing PS wants to do is get in the way of a sale. And ARR is always the most important thing. So oftentimes if something gets discounted, it's PS. But if you have a large PS organization and it's a big part of your cost and profit structure within your company, then the bottom line is the financial performance of your delivery organization impacts the entire company. So it is a company level conversation. And a lot of times sales reps aren't comped on PS revenue. It makes sense. Sometimes they are, most of the times they aren't. And certainly we want to do whatever we can, again, to reduce our implementation efforts. But like you said, sometimes you have a complex product that just requires a significant amount of time to implement. And selling the value of those services and the ROI you receive from those services is important. Looking at attach rates is important, which is just the amount of PS dollars versus the subscription dollars that maybe
Hmm.
the market can bear.
Yep.
In some cases, if the product is relatively straightforward to implement, and you start to reframe your PS team to be able to assert those best practices and productize your implementation, you can get very efficient and the financial results happen naturally. PS becomes a driver of ARR. The margins work out and there's not a lot of conflict. But when you have a very complex product or there's a huge people aspect in terms of transformation or data complexity or integration complexity, now you start to tick up in terms of the effort required to deliver that. And having those discussions about bill rates it's incredibly complicated, and it's never fun because you know that if you have to maintain a certain bill rate, it could potentially impact, say, the discounting on the ARR side. Sometimes a
Mm.
sales rep, I had a former CEO who used to say we negotiate too much with ourselves, which is sometimes the sales reps are a little uncomfortable and immediately go to a discounted amount, not realizing that you can actually sell that value of what we're providing.
Yep.
So it can be difficult, but it's important to have those conversations because bill rates or wherever you can fix fee it and get those margins, how that financial performance plays out is critically important to company financials, particularly if you have a large PS team within your organization.
Yeah. I think now, given we found that through the SDA, the Services Delivery Alliance research, of which you're a member of that
Mhm.
group, um, 60% of services leaders now report into CRO or CEO at the moment. So the trend over the last years has been moving, let's say, up and to the left in the sales cycle.
Yeah.
And depending on where you land, if you land with a true CRO, then they understand margin and they understand that services lags software in terms of margin, and they understand that the gross margin of the company is important to the valuation, particularly if you're in a private equity backed business, which now, you might have been valued 30 times on your EBITDA
Hmm.
X number of years ago, and now you're valued 15 if you're lucky.
Yeah.
So, like, the role of margin has grown in importance. That being said, the inherent block and tackle day to day of, the price of services being a barrier to entry and not slowing down sales, it tends to be the argument that wins in the day to day. So, how you frame certain situations is really important. And I think there isn't a one size fits all like approach. I mean, I've seen deep companies where it's like they get the size of the PS team in one business, they gave away like 8,000 hours on a deal, right? So it
Wow.
was basically it was like 10% of the team for the year. And it was raised when it happened, like when the deal happened, which was at the beginning of the year. This will mean that our margin's going to go from this to this. It was like uh, basically 20% to nothing because we've taken, no, it's probably more like 15%, I think, to nothing because they'd taken effectively 10% of the team for the whole year. And no one
Yeah.
was listening at the time. But at the end of the year, then they were listening, and unfortunately bad things happened to the services organization after that. You've
Yeah.
then got on the flip side, I was talking to one organization where this public company, and on the route to their IPO, the number one salesperson loved services, got the value of services, and was pulling services into every deal, and did the biggest deals, both for software and for services in the company history.
Yeah.
And
Great.
that's the bit which I think often we go to bill rate, it's about protecting that and it's explaining these economics. If you can flip it and you got the data around when we're engaged, we're driving up the deal value.
Yeah.
Do you want that? That's the conversation to try and get into. The problem is there's always like there's the business conversation, the functional conversation, the deal conversation. You're being stretched between these different like vantage points with different stakeholders. So it's just phenomenal. It's a phenomenon. It's not even an argument. It's just a phenomenally difficult, ongoing thing to navigate.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, like you said, the good sales reps and that you'd mentioned the job of a salesperson is not easy. They're trying to navigate multiple different industries,
Yep.
sizes of companies, different competitors and different landscapes. It's challenging. But when you get the ones that truly get it and understand that services can actually help them not only close their deal, but have the customer see more value in what they're getting,
Hmm.
then you start to see those successes. And I think at HireVue, that happened relatively quickly. And it definitely helped us sell to different customers. In fact, PS team came up with an accelerated offering that got us through COVID and
Yeah.
helped our sales reps continue to sell because we had an idea for how we can it was interviewing recruiting software. So when everybody went
Right.
remote, all of a
Yep.
sudden everyone had to do their interviews remotely, but they didn't necessarily need a full enterprise solution. So we were able to be agile and actually help the sales team
Yep.
continue to sell in an environment where it was highly difficult to do.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. We've had that in our business. A services offering expanded our TAM in
Yeah.
effect. It allowed us to, we had we've been up here and we had quite a few smaller actual customers, but that we knew we wanted some certain logos, which were
Mhm.
great to get. So it's like, how do we enable the capturing of certain logos in a certain market? And that was all driven by services. So shout out to Graham and the team for that.
Yeah.
Um, so a couple more things then. I say this a lot, but and I think that I don't know, the exam question for services leaders is always evolving over the course of a year, but kind of fundamentally there's you talked about the mission. The mission is to maximize ARR,
Mhm.
ideally maximize now profitability. I think it
Mhm.
used to be you could maximize ARR and lose some money. Now you can't do that.
Yeah.
Um, and a route to that is obviously very, as we've talked about, accelerating time to first value and time to value. Um, you've touched on this already, and you really like when we were planning for this, you really helped me think this through, which is why it's so important to understand like the level of complexity, right, of the product and how this will influence what you can really achieve in PS. Because it's all very well and good, having this idea that we can package and productize and launch our customers in like 30 days, but that may not be the reality. So talk to us a little bit about some of your thoughts there.
Yeah, again, product complexity, we start talking about reducing margins and reducing time to value with a complex product. Kind of comes back to what I was saying before, which is when you have those relationships with, say, the product team, you can start to collaborate on ways that, especially now in the world of AI, you can use AI to help sort of bring those things in so that you're able to
Yeah.
be more consistent, to be able to productize your offerings and get higher margins, even in a complex product situation. I think it's also important, I'd worked with a product, we had acquired a small company at HireVue that had 400 switches on it that you can choose. So we could choose to spend 200 hours going through every single one of those, or we could say 10% of these really matter. That's what we're focusing on. Now we're going to spend 2 hours instead of 20 days.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely things you can do, even with a complex product, to sort of simplify that complexity for the 80/20 rule. But generally speaking, like you said, FP&A software, there are certain things you just can't shortchange. There are certain things that just take time. The data is very important to get right. So in those cases, product complexity, how much can you package and productize when a lot of it may end up being just bespoke to your organization? Those are some of the challenges that you need to look at if you have a more complex situation versus a simpler product that you can kind of distill down to the 80/20 rule and just focus on, the 80%, getting 80% of it right and 20% of the time.
Yeah. I think that being prescriptive in engagements is a blend of art and science.
Yeah.
A lot of people aspire to move away from this like open bar type of approach, open bar at a wedding, open bar approach to like requirements or what do you need, right?
Mhm.
And I know, sophisticated teams or ideally will not be selling in a sophisticated way and then rolling up to kick off and designing going, so why did you buy again? Like that's not
Yeah.
really if that is the way that you're doing things now, you're kind of a little bit behind the curve. But I think most organizations have tried to iron that out. But being prescriptive is a different thing. So to your point, a lot of companies have, let's say, maybe quite a lot of options in terms of how something could be configured. And the tendency is then to offer up that menu of options to say
Yeah.
there's
What do you
five
want?
ways that you could. Which
Yeah.
one do you want to do? And customers like this is like a night out in Soho when you haven't got a reservation and no one knows to where to go for dinner and you end up going home fabulously drunk and no one's eating a thing. But it's so like that. The nuance to that is like, well, like you said in the 80/20 rule, do actually five of these go away and there's for the 80% there's one or maybe two options and we should be recommending prescribing what that is.
Yeah.
The challenge then is you have to get really down into the nitty gritty, not just about what does your, delivery look like at a high level and what you pitch the customer and this waterfall or agile approach, whatever it is that you do. It's literally down to what are the things that we actually say in these meetings and going and figuring it out and talking to people and like not sending out a survey, not taking what the manager's saying. You got to go and talk to your consultants, your solution architects, and go. So take me through what's your template look like in these meetings? What's your template look like in these meetings? What things do you ask? What do you say? And what you find is that most places don't have a consistent template that they use. They leave it up to people, and then they're sort of like trying to coach. It's like you know, it's we need to be really prescriptive about how we approach these sessions, what we say, what we ask, what we offer, what we don't offer, and then reinforcing that because services is very similar to sales in the sense that you have a process, right? And that you have the what you do, and what gets missed a lot is that it's the how you do it. And it's so intricate and therefore you can have these grand aspirations that we want to compress it from this to this, but you have to be so in the minutiae on a lot of these things in my experience anyway. I don't know what you think.
No, I totally agree. I think before anything else you do, and part of the inside out, you've got to come up with that repeatable methodology and having like a structured playbook with best practices that for seasoned consultants, they have that mindset. They've been there,
Yeah.
they've done it before, they know how to prescribe. It's getting that information back into a knowledge base that you're not overly hamstringing people to say you have to follow these 6 steps and ask these 6 questions in a workshop, but giving them the framework and the structure that says we're going to give you the autonomy to do what makes sense for you and the customer, but there's tools and templates and to your point a specific structure that they can use to help accelerate that process and to make sure we're being consistent and we're focusing on the right things.
Mm. And so finally then, when you think about the sort of the sequencing of activities, so you've talked about kind of coming in, looking at what was the perception of the service organization internally with colleagues, externally in the market. You've talked about how you rebuild the trust. You've talked about the mission, the roles, and the repeatable methodology. A lot of people have got to transform their organizations to either keep pace with the market or to actually go faster than their market has done in the past. So, and there's I've talked about a lot about those sort of the pressure on margins. So how do you think about sequencing these activities? So how do you order them, the order operations, as it were?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first step is working from the inside. It's looking at consistency, some of the things we were just talking about in terms of tools and templates, or repeatable methodology, clear roles and responsibilities, and making sure that you're working efficiently within your organization. Everybody understands their role, they understand their mission, they understand their North Star. The North Star is not utilization, and it's probably not even margin. It's what do they need to do to deliver to the customer, and how do we optimize how they do that? The second part can't avoid looking at costs. So, for example, one company I joined, no matter how big or small the project is, they put 5 people on, 5 different roles. Some of these projects you could probably do with one. You can have a consultant run it on their own. The bigger projects, maybe you need all 5. Somewhere in the middle, the roles might vary. So looking at your cost structure, how you're structuring your teams, your balance of seasoned consultants versus junior consultants, of course, looking at offshoring as an option and optimizing offshoring. Um, One company I joined had a highly inefficient and high cost offshore team that was being used ineffectively. We increased our margins by 15% by just right sizing how we leveraged our offshore team, what work we did with them, how we structured them, bringing them into the organization versus sort of throwing things over the fence. We gained a huge amount of margin points just from doing some simple things like roles and responsibilities, team structure, offshoring. So work within your cost structure to understand how to optimize where you're spending your time. And of course, these days with AI, there's opportunities there, but you can't start with AI. You have to start by getting your people and your processes in place. And then AI can help support that, but you can't overlay AI on a broken process,
Mm.
broken system.
Yep.
Then you start looking at things like fixing the selling and the discounting. So productizing offerings, fixed pricing where you can, looking at your pricing and discounting, looking at your attach rates, understanding what's possible, and doing that sort of education across the board to understand how to maybe look at your selling and discounting process. And then the productization and packaging comes, and then potentially looking at if there's any joint product-led changes that could help facilitate the ability to consistently deliver in a fixed price model where you can get more and more efficient and gain more margins without charging the customer more money. That's really the gold. At HireVue, we were very, very good at that. We had several fixed price offerings. We learned as we went, we got better and better. We were delivering value to the customer, our attach rates were good, and our margin just started to increase. And we didn't even have to think about the financials, they just sort of happened. But again, it all has to start with the people and a joint understanding and a clear line of communication amongst the teams that are engaged with those customers.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. Interesting. I want to add a couple of things into the things that you've recommended. So I think on the methodology side of things, you have to do ride-alongs. And
Yeah.
it can take a little while and it takes up time, but you have to see on at least one, ideally multiple. You have to see all of the different key interactions and go to them. And you also have to learn the skill of like not giving feedback to begin with. That's super important because no one will let you on their calls or they'll
Right, right.
get scared of then having you on because you gave them 30 pages of feedback after meeting
Yeah.
one, right? You got to just go, shut up, camera off, listen, right? Or ideally, this is where, you know, tools like AI come in if you're recording the conversations or if we can use AI to analyze it. As one of the things we've been doing is we've been looking, we looked at our methodology and we said, where are the inflection points? And then we have AI monitoring that and surfacing up where it's working, where it's not working, and that sort of methodology adherence negated the need. It came off of a CEO of a customer saying, "I want to go to a load of these meetings." We're like, "That's terrible use of your time. How can we use AI to do that and learn things without needing to go and be a bit disruptive?" But I think either personal ride-alongs or AI-based ride-alongs very important.
Yeah.
The sales piece is so interesting because if like fundamentally if you can, a lot of it is you're not going to win all the battles, right? You're going to have deals where the customer didn't budget for an implementation, right? So there's going to be some sacrifice on both software and on services in that scenario. I think how you can get to a point where you're like educating finance and sales and CS, like here is how much time we're spending on enabling sales, on supporting renewals, on, you know, driving sales. Like this is, you know, X percentage of our time is going on all of these things. So I've got 100 people and five of them, like the equivalent to, are spending all of their time doing all of this other stuff,
Hmm.
right? So, and let's not complain about that, but let's educate people about that and say, like, how do we use this in a more meaningful and strategic way? Because we're maybe not directing this time as well as we want. It's not necessarily that that needs to stop happening, it's how it needs to happen in the future. Um, I really appreciate you taking the time to prepare. Hopefully you've enjoyed the conversation. I think, a few of the key takeaways from me is like one, don't be a victim. Love that. Because it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think two is really your execution, your own house needs to be in order to build trust. So like before you can start going and influencing sales or this or the other, that's why your own execution is so important because that what helps build trust internally. I also think though that the how you create the mechanism you've talked about giving this structured and objective feedback. I think that's really important. Structured and objective versus this thing doesn't work, that thing doesn't work
Yeah.
is a really important lens to influencing product because that can pay you back massively if there are things that are built that is going to make services lives that much easier. So I think those are a few of the things. And obviously, I share your view that being able to speak the language of the other functions and what's important to them and why is massively important when you're running a business that is influenced by and influences others in your company.
Yeah.
Enjoy it.
Very well said. Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Great conversation. Appreciate it.
Bueno, thank you ever so much for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eileen. Take care.
Thank
Bye.